What caused the sudden disappearance of a racist dictatorship like the Nazis that dominated a whole country? In the decades after the end of World War II, both historians and regular people are still interested in the events of that war. But the fate of those responsible for one of history's greatest horrors is hardly brought up in conversation. Welcome to Pure History. In this video, we will explain what happened with the Nazis after World War II. Don't forget to subscribe and let us know in the comments what you would like to see in the next video. Denazification. After the Allies won World War II, Germany was split into parts that were ruled by the US, the UK, France, and the Soviet Union. With the goal of denazification, the Allies implemented a wide range of measures. The goal of denazification in Germany and Austria was to get rid of Nazi ideas and institutions from public life. Inmates held for Nazi crimes were not treated equally. The conditions in the Soviet incarceration camps were the worst. For this reason, many people tried to use anti-communist sentiments as a disguise to sneak into one of the Western zones. Of the Western zones, French-occupied Germany was the most tolerant area. In their opinion, Germany as a whole was responsible for the war, and they placed less significance on distinguishing between Nazi and non-Nazi. Just too many Nazis. During the 5 years after World War II, more than 400,000 Germans were held in camps while they waited to be punished. In light of the fact that as many as 45 million Germans at the time were members or supporters of the Nazi Party, this figure looks quite astonishing. Denazification had an enormous challenge. There were simply too many Germans involved to process who had done what. Imagine an entire country in line at the DMV. That's the kind of bureaucratic sluggishness we're talking about. Restoring Germany's economy was a further concern. Those who did not follow the denazification policies were demoted to the lowest levels of society. There wouldn't be enough educated people to run a society if every Nazi and Nazi sympathizer were punished. For instance, it was discovered that 90% of lawyers in the British zone were Nazi. Britain decided that 50% of the German legal civil services could be manned by normal Nazis because they couldn't have a functioning society without law and order. The French area also had a shortage of educators. In order to keep the school systems going, they had to bring back 3/4 of the teachers they had fired because of Nazi influence. It wasn't easy to try to rebuild a country while also trying to find and punish a lot of criminals. When denazification began, Eisenhower, an army commander at the time, predicted the process would take 50 years. As of July 1946, however, the Allies had turned denazification over to the Germans. Wait, for what? You read that right. Germany would be responsible for carrying out its own penalty. The continent of South America served as a safe haven for the Nazis. For the worst of the Nazis, South America was a land of welcoming tyrants. It is estimated that as many as 9,000 Nazi officials and accomplices made their way to South America in the years following the war. Although both Brazil and Chile had some exiles, Argentina had far more. After starting World War II as a military attaché in Italy, Juan Perón, the president of Argentina, became a big fan of fascism. To expand his country's influence, he also sought out specialists in many fields to move there. The Argentine government under Perón helped organize rat lines for Nazis to leave the country via the ports of Italy and Spain. In addition, he helped forge travel documents to get people out of the country. Most Nazis made their way down the Pacific using fake Red Cross passports with tourist permits from Argentina. Most Nazis who made it to Argentina used aliases to disappear for a while. Regardless of whether or not their identities were known, Argentina would not transfer them to Germany. Several of them started going by their real names again. Nazi scientists were nabbed in Operation Paperclip. Naturally, Argentina wasn't the only country that borrowed Nazis for its own benefit. As the US and USSR competed to make the best weapons, it was more than important to hire the best scientists and engineers than to deal with human rights violations. In 1945, the US quietly started Operation Paperclip to send German scientists and engineers back to the mainland. Many of these people were Nazi, and they were used as weapons. As the end of the war got closer, the German government realized how important these skills were. So, scientist Werner Ossenberg made a list of names. When a Polish lab technician found the ripped list, it quickly made its way from MI6 to US intelligence. The main goal of Operation Paperclip was to stop the Soviets from taking these people's technological knowledge and recruiting them for their own side. Officially, this was called an evacuation operation, but in reality, it was a kidnapping and forced transfer to the US, where the people were held for months at a time so they could be questioned. Even though many of these real rocket scientists may have worked with the Nazis, many of them went on to have very successful careers in the US and were part of the NASA space program. The Nuremberg Trials. In 1946, Nazis who hadn't already gone into hiding were tried in the Nuremberg trials for their roles in the war, crimes against humanity, and acts of aggression. These trials were significant for the development of international law, especially when it came to how war criminals should be punished. They were also a big step toward punishing the worst people who did bad things during the Holocaust. The first and most famous trial had 24 people on trial, and the outcomes range from being let off with no punishment to being hanged. 12 of them got the death penalty. While the trials brought some measure of justice, the deaths of millions of people and the impunity with which their murderers acted during the Holocaust made the executions of 12 individuals seem like a drop in the bucket. The Nuremberg trials have been called an example of victor's justice and judiciously illegitimate by their critics. Other people have said that it's hypocritical for Allied governments to go after crimes against humanity after doing different things during the war. Germany resumed normal operations. Germany was given the job of getting rid of Nazism even though it was still occupied by friendly countries. This was because the Allies gave up on the project just after a few months. Predictably, Nazi Germany loosened up on its identification and punishment procedures. The law exempted from penalty anyone born after 1919 as having been brainwashed. 75% of previously expelled US public officials were reinstated. Also, 90% of Nazis were labeled lesser offenders to avoid taking the time and trouble to go to court. After 1948, when the US became more worried about the Cold War, the rest of the trials were rushed through in ways that were questionable from a legal point of view. By 1951, the focus had shifted from getting rid of Nazi symbols and signs of power to giving victims and their families money. The German authorities granted amnesties and pardons to around 800,000 individuals. Was Nazi Germany denazified after all? 77% of top officials in Germany's Ministry of Justice were Nazi at the time. Adolf Eichmann. Adolf Eichmann, who planned Hitler's concentration camps and the Final Solution, ended up in Buenos Aires, Argentina, where he ran a Mercedes-Benz assembly plant and raised his family. After hiding out in Argentina for 10 years, Eichmann was finally caught by Israeli agents in 1960. They gave him drugs and sneaked him out of the country by saying he was an airline worker from Israel who had hurt his head. Many people pleaded for Eichmann's extradition from Argentina, but he was eventually prosecuted and executed in Israel. However, not all people who hunted Nazis were working with the government. Simon Wiesenthal. Simon Wiesenthal, a Holocaust survivor turned Nazi hunter, tracked down Franz Stangl in Sao Paulo. Stangl was in charge of the Action T4 euthanasia program, where he put people with mental and physical disabilities to death. Wiesenthal tracked down Stangl and sent him back to West Germany, where he was given a life sentence. Jacques Pilige was deported from the United States in 2019 at the age of 95. In 2005, a historian from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum found out that Pilige had not worked on his father's farm during World War II as he had said in 1949, but rather as a guard at a forced labor camp. It's a shame that not every Nazi was made to pay for their atrocities. Heinrich Himmler. After an attempt on Hitler's life failed in July 1944, his military leader and eventual successor as the Third Reich's number 2, Heinrich Himmler, started making plans for separate peace with the Western Allies while Germany kept fighting the Soviet Union. He even thought about using the captives who were already in the camps as a way to start talks. But the Allies didn't want to deal with Himmler because he was so involved in Nazi war crimes. In April of 1945, Himmler asked Count Folke Bernadotte, the president of the Swedish Red Cross, to deliver a message of surrender to Dwight D. Eisenhower, the supreme commander of the Allied forces. After Hitler heard about Himmler's proposition, he fired and arrested him. Himmler tried to escape the Third Reich by cutting off his mustache and putting on a uniform to look like a member of the secret field police. On May 20, 1945, the Russians caught him and gave him to the British. He eventually told the British who he really was. Himmler killed himself 3 days later, on May 23, 1945, by biting on a cyanide capsule he had hidden in his mouth. This was today's video, but we have more interesting videos for you.